I would love to sit here and tell you that it's all moonbeams and rainbows and your identity just pops back into a happy place, like just boom, just put some water on it and it grows and you're confident and you have an accurate self-appraisal and all of that good stuff. But that's not how it unfolds. How do narcissists steal your dreams and limit your potential? And if this has happened to you, I'm always going to ask you, please drop it in the comments. I want to hear your stories. This may be one of the videos, as I thought about it, I really got angry as I was preparing for it. Because this, to me, is the most terrible legacy of narcissistic abuse. The loss of the potential of the person who experienced the narcissistic abuse. And you know what's interesting? It actually doesn't matter whether your narcissistic abuse happened in childhood, or whether it happened because of a partner, or it happened with a horrible, abusive boss. It can happen at any of those stages. You can end up in this place. So I'll open with the happy ending, so this video isn't too depressing, and then we'll go into the depressing stuff. The best part of surviving narcissistic abuse is that survivors, more often than not, do go on to do amazing things. Once you can get the narcissist out of your life and out of your mind, all of that new time and mental space and mental real estate that you can now open up means that you've now got the bandwidth to do amazing things. And many people do once they are set free. So let's work backwards, because the hard part for people is the years that they wasted in their narcissistic relationship. If it's your parents who are the narcissist, not only did it shape who you are, but you then had to go through the shame, grief, and guilt, the guilt-inducing work of letting them go, and the endless work of getting their invalidating voices out of your head. If it's your partner, you may have come into that relationship with all kinds of big dreams and aspirations you had been building up until you met them. And their future faking and manipulation may have left you slowly clipping your wings a little at a time. Maybe you ended up not finishing school, or you were insulted enough times that you no longer had the courage to open your new business, or ended up filled with so much self-doubt that you wouldn't fight for that promotion at work, or your narcissistic relationship found you moving off to another place too soon because they promised you the world. Never happened, though. And year over year, hearing their invalidating voice left you only enough bandwidth to ruminate about the confusing mess that is your relationship. If you had a narcissistic mentor or boss or business partner, they may have stolen your ideas or your intellectual property, or literally the money in the business. They may have made it so toxic that you left what could have been a promising career or money sunk into a business. You may have been gaslighted so many times that you began to doubt if you were sane, let alone competent. It's the rumination part that is so awful. The amount of time you spend thinking about the terrible things they say, your shock at how unempathic they are, your confusion in the wake of so much gaslighting and manipulation. You ruminate and you wonder and you get caught in the whole cognitive dissonance mind F word, and you get more and more stuck and lose more and more of your mental bandwidth to rumination, and you talk yourself out of your own aspirations. The toxic recipe of gaslighting plus invalidation plus shame plus rumination equals a person who doesn't feel they have the right to pursue their dreams. And the fear that if they did pursue, that their fears that they would shame, the narcissist would shame, or God forbid, you succeeded, that the narcissist would then leave the relationship. I have worked with so many people who have heard the invalidation mantras delivered by their malcontented narcissistic parents, and who left this person wondering, their child, now adult, wondering if they are good enough. And as a result of this, didn't take the chance. They didn't make the leap, whether it was their education or a business or a career or just a great idea. The ever thrumming idea in your head of you are not good enough. Oh, you're an idiot, or who do you think you are? Those words play through your head and again silence those aspirations. The number of people in narcissistic marriages who were laughed at when they voiced an aspiration and are silenced at every turn or mocked in front of other people for getting too big for your britches. And even if you had achieved something already before you came into the relationship, they would still diminish your accomplishments. They might laugh at any awards and honors you receive. They might minimize a promotion because the raise wasn't that big. And one day you lose your fight and you stop trying. The other thing to remember about all narcissists is that they set out to sabotage your dreams. They are so insecure themselves that they could not tolerate your success. So they sabotage it. It can be in your face stuff, like literally calling your employer and saying bad things about you. And more often than not, it's more subtle stuff, like withholding information you might need. But all of their machinations are often designed to subvert your aspirations because their fragile little egos couldn't tolerate your success and the threat to their ego that your success would bring. And that literally robs you of your aspirations. This loss of potential is the reason I do this work. When I stop to think about all of the beautiful and incredible things the world may not see because a fragile narcissist couldn't bear the success of their family member or friend or partner, it makes me sick. One of the most beautiful moments in therapy with any client I work with who has experienced narcissistic abuse is that moment when we actually start talking about their dreams. And I get to not only hear them, which is magnificent, but I get the opportunity to tell them that, wow, amazing, and that they deserve the opportunity to soar, and that I actually am putting my money on them to win this race. I then hand them the proverbial scissors to cut off the sandbags that the narcissist put on their balloon so that it can finally rise. This may be the first video that I've actually ever outlined that made me cry while I was setting my thoughts down. I'm so angry when it comes to this particular issue. If people were unfettered and could be their best selves, extraordinary things wouldn't happen just for the person, but for the world at large. It's obvious I'm not a fan of narcissism, but it's this one piece that enrages me. It's painful to watch people who don't get set free from these relationships until later in life, because for these people there's often paralyzing regret. Perhaps their narcissists finally die, or they do finally get the courage to set down the boundary or get a divorce or whatever, but it may be later in life. I still believe there is an opportunity. Who knows? You may not climb that mountain you'd wanted to climb, but perhaps you can take a hike to its base. Maybe you won't fully open that business, but perhaps you'll take a class you were never permitted to take. Or maybe you'll get a job or volunteer. The aspiration can take hold in another way. It is never too late. We must stop the loss of potential that happens at the hands of narcissists. Remember what I have said over and over. They need us more than we need them. Your success is terrifying for them. Never clip your wings for another human being. Love means letting someone soar, and limiting another human being in any way is abuse. Promise me that you will start reaching for that aspiration initially, even if it's only in your mind. Do one thing a day towards it and say that aspiration out loud to someone you trust. But promise me you won't stop it. Amazing things happen when you finally get out from under the thumb of your narcissists. I am convinced that surviving narcissistic abuse is nothing short of a superpower. Honestly, if you could survive that, you can do anything. The world needs you to succeed and achieve your aspirations and really set fire and turn those goals on. Just please do it. Listen, I would love to hear what you had to give up to survive in this narcissistic relationship, but even more importantly, after giving it up, I want to hear how you were able to turn it around, and I want to hear your stories, not only of surviving, but of thriving and of growth. Again, surviving narcissistic abuse is a superpower. You learn something about people that most people don't know, where everyone is rocking around saying, give everyone a chance. It's give them a chance. You just end up becoming the smartest person in the room. You're like, yeah, no, I'm not giving them a chance. You become smart. You become savvy. Yeah, a lot of people are going to say, what's your story? Why aren't you just going along with it? Because you're never just going to go along with it again. Give yourself permission to cut the sandbags off. Let yourself soar high. Once you get that distance from the narcissist, I promise you, it's going to be like you lost 300 pounds overnight. You will feel as light as air. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. But even if you can't get out of this relationship, please make a commitment to yourself that at some level, day by day, brick by brick, you're going to allow your potential to shine. That robbing of human potential is by far the most horrific legacy of narcissistic abuse, not just in individual relationships, but in how we've constructed a world full of enablers and full of narcissists. We must stop together. Stop them from collectively hobbling so much potential out there. Again, share those survivor stories. Everybody needs to see this. If you've got a good survivor story, a life you started after getting away from your narcissist, I need that in these comments, because hearing someone else's story is what often sets other people free. A lot of what makes healing so difficult in these narcissistic relationships, any kind of painful relationships, but narcissistic relationships kind of uniquely get stuck in our head, is the memories and the echoes of those relationships. And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is. It could be romantic, it could be family, even workplace. But it's those echoes that come back at us. And what that means, and what many survivors have even shared with me, is they say, I feel like I've lost parts of my life. I don't get to go to restaurants I once wanted to. There's entire national parks I won't go to, or destinations I won't go to, and movies I won't watch, and food I won't eat. Those kinds of visceral experiences, taste and smell and sight, sound, actually hold so much meaning. Think of how evocative music is. So this is this one is about music. And years ago, when I had been in one of many narcissistic relationships I myself have been in, this person had given me some music. Listen to this music, listen to this music. And it was music I wasn't familiar with. And there were some songs on it. And because I was sort of so into this relationship, I kept listening to the music over and over again. And again, it was music I wasn't familiar with. After that relationship ended and I was very shattered, I couldn't listen to any of that music again. It's been a very long time. So the memory of a lot of that music faded. I cleaned it out of my, at the time it was actually even music I think you listen like a CD or tape or whatever it was. And then I had my iPhone and I have Apple Music, and I just set it to shuffle just a selection of music, not stuff that was on my device, but just shuffle away. I was on a bit of a long drive. And it was night and it was raining and it was in a place that I'm not fully familiar with. It wasn't where I live. The music played, and one of the songs from that old tape came on. And because it was night and raining, it was already an evocative time. And I was like, my sympathetic nervous system was like, hello, sweetheart, here I am. And I was like, what is happening? But that relationship's in my past. I wasn't feeling the sense of sadness, missing, nothing like that. I was like, wow. And I listened to the song because it's a beautiful song. And I listened to it, and I was really fascinated to sort of listen to my body, pay attention to my body. But for the first time in years, and I finally then listened to the words again. The words had one set of meaning at that time, and I listen to it now, and it had an entirely different kind of a meaning. It's absolutely beautiful lyrics in the song. And I thought, how interesting and how sad that for so many years, this song was out of my life. Because I thought, this is a beautiful song. It actually relates a lot to the kind of work I do now, really focusing on narcissistic abuse. And I thought, gosh, how many things we lose. It was powerful for me because then I had to stop and get some gas. And on that stop, I actually took that song, I found it on Apple, and I downloaded it to my phone. And it was an interesting moment for me because in essence what it was doing was saying, I could reintegrate this thing that I had to keep away to feel safe, right? That song was too evocative, but I was ready to receive it back. It wasn't just the beauty of the song at that moment. I was really moved by how my psyche, anyone's psyche, shifts a little bit to let some things back in. We can go back to those places, hear the songs, watch the films, eat the foods, let the memories back in. Be with the beauty that may very well have occurred at the same time we were in that relationship, had to put down for a while to heal. But even like a broken bone heals, and one day we can start running on it again or lifting with it again, the psyche is no different. One day it's strong enough to let this old stuff back. Such a pretty song. And then since then, I've put it like on this little favorites list, and I love to listen to music when I'm in the car. It's my favorite place to do it. And it comes up. And when it does, definitely there's a bit of melancholy because it meant something at one time, and that thing I obviously got narcissistically abused away. And now it gets to mean something else. And that's what healing is. Healing is about flexibility. It's about putting things down and taking them back in and letting them become something else. So as any of you think about healing from narcissistic abuse, it can also be helpful to think like if something's passed, if it's been a long time and you might feel ready, you might say, what were some of the songs that I associated with that time? Or any other things, a film, a place, whatever. Do you feel ready to face it? Mine struck me by total surprise. Like I said, it was a random shuffle because that song was completely out of my memory. So that just was almost given to me by the universe, and it ended up becoming a really big sort of lesson about healing. And those things may come up as a surprise, but they also may be something you can go back and see if you're ready to bring those things in. I'd hate to think that in these narcissistic relationships, which as challenging as they were, there were some good things in them, and that we can sift through the wreckage of these sort of burned out hulks of these past relationships that did hurt us. But as we sift through that wreckage, we may find some things of beauty that we want to keep, and that are things that we can take forward in our journey as we heal and show ourselves that life goes on. These relationships sure as hell didn't break us. And in fact, these beautiful things can mean something very different now. So when we think about what it feels to be free, a narcissistic relationship is actually quite the opposite. Many people in these relationships feel absolutely imprisoned. Imprisoned by the manipulation, imprisoned by the gaslighting, imprisoned by the invalidation, and imprisoned more than anything else by the confusion. And the fact is, some people feel literally imprisoned in these relationships. These are marriages or long-term relationships they feel like they can't get out of. These are relationships with parents they feel that they cannot sever. These may be relationships in the workplace at a really difficult time in the economy when people feel lucky to have jobs, let alone feel like they're empowered to leave them despite having a really toxic and narcissistic boss. So when we talk about this idea of independence and freedom, and in fact, when I looked down at my calendar this week, I said, oh, interesting. The 4th of July is this weekend, Independence Day. And the minute I wrote down independence, I said, this really warrants a video. Because can you really be free? Can you really be independent if you're stuck or forget stuck, in a relationship with a toxic person, with a narcissist? And I'm here to tell you, yes, you can. And let me tell you why I think that to be true. There are multiple freedoms we have in this world, right? We have the freedom to maybe go out and do what it is we want. If you're able to get in your car, go out and drive, walk out your front door, spend money as you want, have those choices, at least in much, not all of the world. It's a very complicated conversation in the United States and around the world now. Am I free to wear a mask or not wear a mask? That's a story for a different day. That's bigger than this video. But those are sort of literal freedoms that many of us in different parts of the world may have. Again, not all of us do. But there's one freedom, and in fact, when you really want to think about who wrote it best, it's Viktor Frankl. In Man's Search for Meaning and his other existential writings, he talks about the one freedom that every human being has. Even if you're living in a totalitarian government, even if you're living in a place where many freedoms are not accorded to the citizens, and even if you're in a narcissistic relationship or have had a history of narcissistic relationships in your family or in your personal life, where you feel like many of your freedoms have been taken away. Frankl would argue the one freedom all of us have is the freedom to choose to think as we wish. And that's something that this YouTube channel has always been about. I am the first one, as you know, to recognize not everybody has the luxury of walking away from their narcissistic relationships. I wish they did, but they don't. And it would be impractical for me to argue otherwise. Money, culture, religion, fear, danger, guilt, all these things keep people stuck in these relationships. We know that. And I'm not going to sit here, listen, in an ideal world, you go no contact. In an ideal world, you get out. Most of us don't live in that world. The freedom you have, if you're stuck in one of these situations, is how you think about it. The expectations you bring, the radical acceptance you bring, the knowing that this is not going to change. To stop putting yourself up on the chopping block. To no longer take your dreams to this person, to really, really disengage and keep it to superficial topics so you can keep the important stuff about you, your authenticity, your inner psychology, your vulnerabilities, and your aspirations, and keep them behind that wall, keep them behind that gate that only those who deserve to have entry, who are safe enough to hear that stuff gets. And that's sure as heck not the narcissist in your life. You have the freedom to choose those things. So when we think about when we're in a toxic relationship, and we really do feel when we're in a toxic relationship, so many of our freedoms have been taken away from us. We feel anything but independent. And here we are rolling in, at least in the United States, on this holiday that's supposed to commemorate our independence. I want those of you who are in narcissistic relationships to really stop and think about how, you know what? I can think about this differently. All those things I have been talking about on this channel, all those things I want you to do, from the realistic expectations to the not engaging, to the not defending, to the not explaining, every one of those things is a choice. And it's a choice you can execute every day, every hour in a narcissistic relationship. Some days are always going to be harder than others. That's the nature of these relationships. But if you can always remind yourself that you still always have that freedom to think about this the way you want, and don't judge yourself for those thoughts. Some people say, I feel like such a bad person for thinking in such a dismissive way about this person. They lost that respect the first time they gaslighted you. They lost that respect when they consistently invalidated you. Respect is something to be earned or lost. They don't have it. No guilt is needed, but that's your personal journey to walk through. So, before you fire up the barbecue, before you light up those sparklers and have those socially distanced Independence Day celebrations, I want you to take a moment with yourself and say, you know, I may be stuck in a toxic relationship, but yeah, this is going to be the year going forward, from this Independence Day forward, that I'm going to give myself permission to exert myself the freedom, give myself the permission to exert my freedom, to think as I wish in this relationship, and to be able to set the boundaries I need so that perhaps you can keep walking into a more truly independent future. This is a relatively standard pattern in most cases of narcissistic abuse, but it can come about through some very different pathways. The first is what can often be seen in a controlling, malignant, even coercive relationship. The narcissistic partner deliberately and systematically isolates you. This can start gradually. Early on, love bombing. I feel such an intense connection with you. I want to spend every waking minute with you. Or they text you, what are you doing? Who are you with? What are you about? FaceTime me from there. I want to see where you are. Or they might tell you, stop working. I can support us both. Or what are you wasting all this time on school for? Just spend more time with me. I got this. That friend of yours, she doesn't have your back. She says some really shady stuff. I don't like her. I don't trust her. I don't think she's a good friend for you. Your mother doesn't like me. You know what? I'm not going over to her house anymore. She disrespects me. I don't even like you spending that much time with her. What are you, a mama's girl? Why do we have to have people over again? Why can't it just be you and me? And then you slowly lift your head and you find that you've become pretty darn isolated. And in some cases, your comings and goings are being carefully monitored and restricted. The other path, it's different. It's a path that's really littered with shame. You may start to sense this relationship isn't always quite right. Maybe even some friends and family see it and you try to cover it up. Maybe your friends and family even start saying something. I don't really love how he treats you. But you aren't ready to let the relationship go for many reasons. Perhaps it's trauma bonding, perhaps because you're afraid of being alone, perhaps because you don't want to start dating again, perhaps it's the hope that it's someday going to get better, perhaps it's the guilt about leaving, or perhaps even guilt about even thinking anything bad about your partner. Maybe it's all of the above. But you do sometimes wish you had someone to talk to about this relationship because it's confusing. However, because you don't want to spill the beans and tell the truth about your partner and tell your friends or family how bad your partner's been, you don't say anything. And as a result, you may fall out of touch with all of these people because it's hard to see people you're close to and either not tell them the truth, or you might be afraid that you're going to let something slip. The shame of what this relationship has become can isolate you further and further. There is the fear of the pressure that people might put on you to leave, but there's also the concern that if you tell them bad things about your partner and the relationship does keep going or gets back together if you've broken up, that it will impact their view of him or her, your partner, or of you. And since you've been propping up this vision of your narcissist with your false narrative about them and the relationship, it can be scary to think that you would pull back the curtain and tell the truth and then have to face the shame of staying in the relationship with them, knowing all about how bad your narcissistic partner's behavior has been, that they now know it too. It can feel uncomfortable that they kind of know your truth. Then there's the third path of isolation, which is exhaustion. These relationships are really tiring. You keep trying. You keep the house clean. You try to get things perfect at work. You try to make enough money. You try to ensure the kids are clean and out of the way. A narcissistic partner, in essence, it's like having a really badly behaved child that you're not allowed to discipline. So just by dint of sheer exhaustion, you may get isolated because you haven't got time for anything or anyone else. People from narcissistic families really understand isolation. Sometimes your family itself is isolated, but it may also be that you didn't want to bring friends around when you were a child, because of how your narcissistic parents or siblings or other family members behaved. Again, that's the shame. You may have felt you couldn't talk about your family or were just simply ashamed when you saw how loving families functioned and realized that wasn't how your family worked. Your family may have also isolated you as well with strict rules and control, or you got stuck having to manage your narcissistic parents' demands, leaving you little time to go and make friends. The sense of isolation when you are from a narcissistic family is a theme that can often dog you for your entire life. Isolation is a typical element of narcissistic abuse. I've rarely seen a relationship where it's not an issue, and it's quite bad for your mental health. At this point in history, we're living in the era of isolation, and it's taking a toll on all of us. But the isolation experiences that are a part of narcissistic abuse are a unique issue because it may be self-enforced, it may be narcissist-enforced, your isolation. But even when you are amongst people, you may still feel isolated. The experience of a narcissistic relationship is something that not everyone understands. And more often than not, other people do gaslight you. People telling you things like, oh, it can't be that bad, or if it's that bad, why don't you just leave? Or maybe you guys just need a weekend away. Or if it's your family, people may say nonsense like, your mom or dad, they didn't really mean that. They don't mean to hurt you. Or they did the best they could. Or you shouldn't speak so badly about your family. It reflects badly on you. And all of this tribe gaslighting coalesces. And hopefully resources like this YouTube channel and other YouTube channels, books, support groups, and the other resources out there help you feel less alone. Millions out there are suffering with narcissistic abuse. I promise you, you do have a community. So what do you do about this isolation? Yeah. I'm going to say it. Number one, therapy. It's one of the first steps to addressing social isolation. If therapy is not accessible to you, please consider online support groups or group therapy, which may serve as no-cost or low-cost options. You need someone to bear witness to your pain to help you cut through this isolation. If you are being isolated by a partner and it's getting severe, please consider exploring domestic violence resources and agencies near you. You can look up information online, but it is very important that you don't look up these resources online if the device is on a shared network like the cloud, or it's shared iPads and phones where a partner could see it. Use a friend's phone or a work computer, but explore those resources carefully. You don't have to, thirdly, I want you to remember, you don't have to talk about your relationship when you talk to friends. You can just give them a non-committal answer. Everything's fine with him, everything's fine with her, we're fine. But talk about them. Just check on them. Just the act of social contact could be helpful. Fourth, try and walk somewhere where you can be distanced, but at least you could see other people. Yeah, it can be loneliest when you're in a crowd, but if you can see other human faces, that can sometimes help. Number 5, find all of the narcissistic support resources you can. They're here. There are social media feeds on Facebook and Instagram. There are good communities springing up all the time. Here's what I ask from all of you. In the comment section of this video, if there are narcissistic abuse resources that have been useful, will you please put those links in the comment section? I want to help people get to those places so they don't feel isolated, and I want this to be a place where people know where they can go and get some of that support. Breaking out of isolation is the narcissist's fear. They don't want you to break out because, of course, it means you might leave or get other people to tell you that you might need to leave or give you support. Start small. Listen to alternate viewpoints. The more you can hear other points of view, the more you can be with other people, the more you can have other reality checks and touchstones, the less likely you are to be isolated. It is such a standard part because there's so much shame about being in these relationships, but you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're a human being. There is no instruction manual for this. I'm doing my best here to give you one, but you're figuring this out. and you don't need to figure this one out alone. So I do hope, like I said, resources like this and all the resources you guys are dropping in the comments section are going to give us some insights into places that have been useful for you. Anything, like I said, Instagram feeds that have been great, people of good Facebook pages, you name it. Let's get it all organized here. And those people who are doing great work about getting this information out, let's go over and take a look at what they've got so we can make this community bigger and bigger all the time. So let's try it like this. I'm going to put this as a conjecture to you. Imagine you lived amongst a group of really, really tall people, and you're of average height. I don't know, 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", 5'8" if you're a guy. Let's say everyone around you was 6'3" or taller. So over time, your identity became a sort of smaller statured person. You'd automatically stand in the front of group pictures, maybe even ask people to reach stuff for you. Then let's say you moved out of this house of tall folks and you start living with people with a range of heights, and you're no longer the smallest one in the group. That's going to be a shift. Or, more realistic examples, those of you who might have been in a really, really competitive, intense job, or you started working out with people who were elite athletes, or you went to one of those really, really competitive colleges, and your identity as being really good at something got a little crongled, and you thought, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Context matters. Our identity, our sense of who we are, is very much shaped by the context. Our identity might be like, well, I'm actually not that tall when we lived with the really tall people, pull us away from the tall people, and maybe put us with a mix of heights, and you're like, oh, I'm kind of average height. You might think like you're actually really good as a student, as an athlete, as a person in a given job, but then you're working with the best and most driven, the best of the best, and you're thinking, oh, okay, your identity shifts from like, I thought I was really great at this, not as good as I thought. Context can shape identity, even though identity feels like something very stable. In a narcissistic relationship, identity is also very much shaped by the toxic stuff that happens. And things that people in these relationships often feel like, I'm too needy, I ask for too much, I'm always doing the wrong thing, I'm socially unskilled, I'm not that smart, I'm not good enough. So think about how your identity was shaped by being in a narcissistic relationship. And while this is very profound when you're growing up, your identities can get formed and reformed by being in a narcissistic relationship in adulthood. You may be confident and well put together, and then get into an adult narcissistic relationship, and then recognize that your identity slides into some really sort of distorted patterns. But that narcissistic relationship kind of becomes a backdrop for your identity, especially when it's an important or significant relationship. And even if it is an identity that doesn't feel good, things like, I'm not good enough, I'm mediocre, I'm selfish, whatever it is, the narcissistic relationship is almost like a pathological scaffold that keeps that identity in place. Then, what if the relationship does end, or you do step away from it? What happens then? I would love to sit here and tell you that it's all moonbeams and rainbows, and your identity just pops back into a happy place, like just boom, just put some water on it, and it grows, and you're confident, and you have an accurate self-appraisal, and all of that good stuff. But that's not how it unfolds. Most people, when their narcissistic relationship ends, find themselves sort of banging around a little bit, without the dysfunctional scaffold of the narcissistic person. Who are you? Their voices get into your head. You still think of yourself as how they talked about you. But without them being in your life, you might actually now have some competing healthy voices trickling in. But that doesn't mean we just pop out of it and out of that negative identity. And sometimes that sort of lost-ish feeling after one of these relationships ends can even leave you wondering if you were wrong to step away, and wonder who you are. In the absence of a new identity, our tendency is to sort of hold on to the one we had, and that's not doing you any favors. This experience of sort of feeling like a lost identity outside of the narcissistic relationship, remember that narcissistic relationships keep us really busy. There's something to do. We have to try to be enough. We have to anticipate their needs. We have to walk on eggshells. We have to ride the roller coaster. Awful as that busy work was, it was sort of something to do. So with even all of that lost, it's like losing a job. And if you've ever lost a job or retired, you know that some of your identity goes with it, and that's not easy. Growth is uncomfortable. And because we try to avoid discomfort, we may avoid growth and remain locked into bad jobs, bad relationships, bad family situations, bad situations of all kinds, because the devil we know and the fear of the unknown, all of that stuff, it doesn't mean we don't want to grow, but we also don't want to be uncomfortable. Trying to reshape our identities post-narcissist can feel really destabilizing. And it's also about finding new things to do, finding yourself. All of this is a central aspect of healing, and it's also one of the hardest. There's no quick pathway on this. Initially, you may find that rumination keeps you stuck in the identity you held in the narcissistic relationship, and that takes time to evaporate. Talk about it, process it, feel the feelings. Don't just distract, but feel them. Slowly start developing new aspects of yourself. You need to move slowly in the post-narcissism landscape because you are learning a new version of yourself. When you aren't invalidated and you are aware that you aren't invalidated, you may be more likely to take more chances, to be a little proud of something you did, to talk to someone new. It takes a minute. Sometimes it can even take years to get there. But having people around you that can point out to you the new things happening and then receiving praise for good things you've done, people who are showing interest in what you have to say, who are not stealing in reality, the more of that happening means you start to trust yourself more too. But this initial sense of, who am I? Like, what am I about? Kind of a loss of identity is a very normal part of the initial grief and of the healing process. Don't let it psych you out. Getting to know yourself is a getting acquainted process with someone new. Figure out what you want, what you like, above all, what you need. You may find out that you actually like to go to bed early, or you like to eat dinner at 4, or recognize that it takes you a minute to warm up at a party, or that you want to avoid violent movies or stay in on a Saturday night. Just basically gave you the Dr. RAMANI handbook there. But all of those patterns may have been so shamed that you started to believe that they weren't true of you, or you tried to negate things that were true of you to become what the narcissistic people in your world wanted and needed for themselves. Healing means it's time to be you. That is the type of part of healing that is much harder to do if you stay in a narcissistic relationships. But please try to find safe spaces where you can be you. And in fact, you may then recognize that your safest relationships are the ones where you can be you and allow your true self to shine. For those of you interested in more content on healing, please check out the video notes. You can get more information on my healing program. But remember that we are so shaped by the narcissist that seeing ourselves without them seems like it's going to be a walk in the park. But it's actually a little bit hard because now all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, I thought I was the short one around here. You start to realize that their context, the only way that works was you devaluing yourself, finding that true depth of you, that courageous, serene, good you that was always there. That unearthing happens when you're no longer having the sun blocked by the shadow of a narcissistic relationship. Thanks again.